girl's house that I will call Ava D. Right here in the yellow is where the party was at. Perfectly plot out every dock that they stopped at on this little trip of theirs before they went to the boat dock.
Wait a minute, you guys, there's cameras on the billion, and they can't even say they don't work because there's a solar panel. Now I know you see me watching you, and I know you see me watching me.
A major new update has surfaced, and it could change how people understand this case. Previous statements from officials, law enforcement, and the legal teams may not tell the complete story. New reporting is focusing on Horn Island, the boat's reported route, the locations where it may have stopped, and one especially important question: what surveillance footage could exist? Cameras may be one of the biggest pieces of this puzzle. Reports indicate that surveillance systems were located not only around Horn Island, but also near several places connected to the boat's reported route. If those locations were monitored around the clock, the footage could potentially help verify the timeline, including when the boat arrived, where it traveled, and how long it remained at certain locations. Attention is now turning to whether the relevant recordings have been requested, preserved, and reviewed. Attorney Ben Crump has reportedly sought records connected to the case, while questions remain about access to possible evidence in Ocean Springs. If surveillance footage exists from the docks or other key locations, it could provide a clearer picture of the boat's movements and help separate confirmed facts from speculation. The Jeep's coordinates add another important layer to the timeline. Mapping the reported locations makes it easier to see exactly where the boat may have traveled and which areas could have surveillance footage or other records connected to its movements. Additional reporting from Ocean Springs has focused on several locations that may be relevant to reconstructing what happened on July 4th. The key locations identified were Horn Island, Fort Bayou, and Lover's Lane.
Y'all ready for today's Nolan Wells info drop? So first off, we remember these GPS coordinates that were plotted for us, remember? Those GPS coordinates were taken from Wyatt's boat and they were plugged into Google Earth, and they developed a PowerPoint slide that we saw there that mapped out all of the points. So I decided to overlay those Google points on top of the points of the research that I'd already been doing.
Looking at these points together could help establish a clearer sequence of events and show how the reported Jeep's information lines up with the available evidence. The central question is whether records from these locations can confirm the reported timeline. The Jeep's data provides specific points to examine, while surveillance systems and other documentation from those same areas could potentially show when the boat appeared and how its movements unfolded throughout the day. The next location to examine is Horn Island. Several homes are situated relatively close to the island, including high-value properties that may have modern security and surveillance systems. That raises an important question about whether any privately owned cameras captured activity in the surrounding area during the relevant time frame. The possible camera coverage may extend beyond private properties. Some reports also claim that cameras are installed around public pavilions for safety and security purposes. If those systems were operating at the time, their recordings could become another useful source for checking the reported timeline and determining what activity, if any, was captured near these locations. The properties around this area are high-value homes, making security an important concern for many residents. Like any waterfront community, property owners may use surveillance systems to protect homes, boats, and equipment from theft or unauthorized access, particularly around docks where people and vessels can enter or leave. That makes the amount of possible camera coverage especially relevant. Beyond privately owned security systems, the area reportedly includes additional monitoring technology.
I discovered some interesting stuff, because if they were just overlaying it on Google Earth, it should have been easy as cake, right? Well, I cannot tell you how many hours I spent trying to perfectly overlay this. Like, look at the islands in the middle here. I get them lined up and then other things won't match up. Like, you'll notice, like I said, these islands, look, they aren't moving, but everything else around it isn't working. So right away, my instincts are telling me that somebody manipulated this image to cover something up,
potentially creating several sources of footage that could help establish activity around the docks. Another important detail is how some of these surveillance cameras appear to be powered. Cameras positioned near the dock reportedly have dedicated solar panels, which could allow them to operate independently of the regular electrical supply. Their positioning also appears designed to monitor people approaching and leaving the dock. Rather than assuming whether every camera was functioning properly, investigators could determine which systems were operational and whether recordings from the relevant time frame were preserved. The possible surveillance coverage may extend beyond a single dock. Reports suggest that cameras could be positioned around multiple docks along the route, creating additional locations where investigators may be able to check the boat's reported movements. The bridge is another important point along that route. If the boat traveled underneath a drawbridge, surveillance equipment may have been installed nearby for operational and public safety purposes, including monitoring vessel traffic and incidents around the bridge. Any available footage from the relevant time frame could help investigators compare the reported GPS route with what was actually captured on camera. Security cameras may also have been positioned toward the water, particularly around waterfront properties where monitoring boats, docks, and nearby activity can be an important safety measure. If cameras were operating in these areas, they could provide another way to compare the reported route with the available timeline. The next location connected to that reported route is Lover's Lane. After mapping the locations associated with the Jeep's information, additional reporting examined these areas individually and identified multiple visible surveillance cameras. The repeated presence of cameras along the reported route raises a key question: which systems were recording during the relevant time frame, and whether any footage was preserved for investigators to review. Waterfront homes along the reported route appear to have gated entrances and private security measures, adding another potential source of surveillance footage. If these systems were operating during the relevant period,
So honestly, I just did the best I could, and I mostly just focused on the top half, trying to get like the marina and the grandparents' house they went to all line up. So now we can really follow which way this boat was driving and the kind of stops it seemed to be making. And if you'll notice here, it goes right next to that marina that I was telling you guys about with the Marty McGrath, which is who, according to Katie, that she got a ride from. So they passed the marina, and as you can see, it juts out, almost like it was pulling up to this dock.
they could help clarify parts of the Nolan Walls case that remain uncertain. Even if certain recordings were not initially obtained by law enforcement, preservation requests and subpoenas may help determine whether relevant footage still exists. Ben Crump has reportedly pursued records connected to the case, which could include security footage from locations along the reported route. That footage could be especially important when examining the boat's movements. Investigators are still working to establish key details, including which boats were present, who was aboard, and when particular vessels reached or passed different locations. Cameras near individual piers could potentially show whether a boat stopped, continued past, or remained in an area for a period of time. The bridge, Lover's Lane, and Fort Bayou could also provide additional points for checking the timeline. Possible sources include restaurants, waterfront homes, private security systems, public cameras, and automated roadway camera networks. If recordings from several locations are available, investigators could compare their timestamps with Jeep's information and other evidence to build a more precise account of the boat's reported route. Affluent waterfront neighborhoods often have significant security measures because homes, vehicles, boats, and other valuable property can be targets for theft. That makes surveillance systems, including private cameras and automated roadway camera networks, another potential source of information investigators may want to examine. The bigger question is whether relevant footage exists and can still be obtained. Different security systems retain recordings for different lengths of time, so identifying and preserving footage from the dates surrounding July 4th could be important. Rather than assuming recordings were deleted or unavailable.
And then there's these two houses here, especially this house, where it seems like the boat pulled into the docks there. Then it went all the way down here. There's a little like lock area here, so you have to go through here. And it went to the bridge. And I was like, why did they go all the way to the bridge to turn around? But it turns out right here is a big old fishing pier. Then right next to that is the Ocean Springs Yacht Club.
Investigators can determine which cameras were operating, how long their footage was retained, and whether copies were preserved. There could be several possible sources: public security cameras, private residential systems, businesses, restaurants, bridge cameras, and roadway monitoring systems may have captured portions of the reported route. When combined with Jeep's information, timestamps from these recordings could potentially confirm or challenge parts of the existing timeline. Another important question is how thoroughly any available footage has been reviewed. Investigators may need to compare recordings from multiple locations instead of relying on a single camera or source. In the Nolan Wells case, that process could help clarify whether the available evidence supports an accidental incident or points investigators toward additional questions requiring closer examination. Following the reported route reveals another important detail. Surveillance cameras appear to be present at multiple points along the way. Cameras have reportedly been identified near bridges, docks, and other locations connected to the boat's possible path, creating several potential opportunities to track its movements. If usable footage exists, it could potentially answer a critical question about how many people were aboard the boat at different points in the timeline. Because the vessel reportedly had open areas visible from outside, certain camera angles may have captured people on board as it traveled away from Horn Island and past other monitored locations. However, these details still require verification. The available information has not been independently authenticated, so it should not be treated as established fact. Even so, the locations identified provide specific leads that could be compared against Jeep's records, surveillance footage, timestamps, and other verified evidence. This material should not be treated as proof of what happened. Its main value is in examining the tone and emotional context of the reported call, rather than assuming every statement in it is factually accurate. One theory raises questions about the timing of the reported tow call and when the family was notified. However, there is currently no verified basis here to conclude that the call was planned.
There's literally cameras everywhere out here, y'all. Okay, so I have now made it to Old Fort Bayou Pier where they pulled in to a stop. This is an oyster house right here, and then next to it is a fireworks stand. Now, I don't see any cameras here, but let me get in my car and I'll show you where there is a camera because I'm too fat to walk. For reference. What's that? Oh, what's that? Camera, guys, with a light. Is this nice? Where are you? Oh, yeah. Okay, we are now over here. So that is how far the oyster house is. I want to show you guys something.
That anyone was creating an alibi, or that connections with local law enforcement influenced the response. Those possibilities would require independent evidence before they could be treated as anything more than speculation. What can be examined is the timeline itself. If the family was not notified until around 11 Necha, investigators could compare that timing with phone records, dispatch information, Jeep's data, surveillance footage, and witness accounts. The sheriff was also described as saying, "Oh yeah, it looks like an accidental drowning." That statement should be considered in its proper context and alongside the complete investigative record, rather than interpreted on its own. One possibility is that authorities initially viewed the situation as a tragic accident and believed there was no evidence pointing to anything more complicated. That could explain why some early statements sounded confident, but it does not establish what actually happened or what anyone involved believed at the time. The sea tow call, however, remains an important part of the timeline. Rather than proving that anyone had a plan or attempted to create a particular story, the call may provide details that can be compared with other accounts, timestamps, Jeep's information, and surveillance records. If inconsistencies appear, investigators can determine whether they have a simple explanation or require further examination. At this stage, the circumstances surrounding Nolan's passing have not been fully established in the information being discussed. The focus should remain on verified evidence and whether the sea tow call supports or conflicts with other parts of the reported timeline. That makes the exact timing of the sea tow call even more important. The goal is not to force the call into a particular theory, but to determine where it fits within the larger sequence of events. Even a small difference in timing could help establish where the boat was, what was happening around it, and whether the different accounts line up. The same approach applies to the surveillance footage discussed earlier. If cameras captured the boat near the docks, bridge, Fort Bayou, or Lover's Lane,
and a lot of these families are connected to the yacht club. But before I go on, I want to play a portion of this audio that's supposedly like a voicemail that has been going around. It hasn't been authenticated, but it has important information. Because I'll be honest, it sounds genuine to me and it works with my data. So hold on.
But he was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna go back with Katie. We'll be right behind y'all. We were all going to the same house, the same place." He was like, "I'll be right behind y'all. Y'all go ahead without me. I'll see y'all, I'm literally gonna be right behind y'all, whatever."
those recordings could potentially be matched with Jeep's coordinates and call timestamps. That would create a much clearer timeline based on independent records rather than memories or speculation. Another detail worth examining is whether multiple cameras captured the same movement from different locations. Matching timestamps across separate systems could help confirm when a vessel entered or left a particular area and potentially show how many people were visible aboard. Investigators would still need to authenticate every recording and confirm that the vessel shown is actually the one connected to the case. That is why preserving the original footage matters so much. The next step is determining what recordings were available, which ones were requested, and whether their timestamps correspond with the reported movements already documented in the timeline. But simply locating a camera does not mean investigators automatically have useful footage. Each system could have different recording settings, storage limits, viewing angles, and timestamps. Some cameras may record continuously, while others activate only when movement is detected. That makes the technical details just as important as the existence of the cameras themselves. The timeline could become much more precise if several independent records point to the same moments. A Jeep's location might place the boat in one area.
Wyatt and all them left because they were like, okay, you're just gonna go with Katie, whatever. Well, then everybody got back in and we were all at Ava's house and...
So first off, all of us were gonna go to the same place. I'm gonna go in with Katie, meaning Katie was supposed to be at that party with them. Or at least whoever Katie was with was supposed to be at that party, right?
While a camera timestamp could potentially confirm when a vessel matching its description passed nearby. Phone records, calls, and other documented activity could then be compared against those same times. There is also an important distinction between seeing a boat and identifying exactly who was aboard. Distance, lighting, camera quality, and viewing angles can all affect what footage actually shows. Investigators would need to verify the vessel first and carefully determine what can genuinely be identified rather than drawing conclusions from unclear images. That verification process could become especially important when comparing the reported stops along the route. If footage exists from more than one location, the sequence of timestamps may help narrow down when the boat moved from one point to another and where gaps in the timeline still remain. Those gaps are where the timeline becomes especially important. Instead of focusing on one theory, the stronger approach is to identify the last confirmed location, the next confirmed location, and exactly how much time passed between them. That could narrow the window investigators need to examine. Records from different sources may also tell slightly different stories. A Jeep's timestamp, phone record, marina log, or documented call could place an event at a specific time, while witness recollections may be less precise. If those details do not immediately match, that does not automatically mean someone was being dishonest. Memories can be imperfect.
The important part is the name of the person who was throwing the party was Ava. Now, I found Ava. I'm not going to put her name out there, but simple Google searches will find this information. And I was able to basically just Google her name and find her address. And so the party was actually right in this yellow area. Again, I'm not going to be like pointing out people's houses, but I found it. After they leave this pier that's right next to the yacht club, they go all the way back and then they hook around and they go right next to where the party is.
And electronic systems can sometimes record information differently. The key is finding details that can be independently confirmed. Investigators can compare departure and arrival times, reported stops, communications, and any available records from businesses or waterfront facilities along the route. Each verified point makes the remaining unknown period smaller. That could also help determine whether certain reported movements were actually possible within the available time frame. If one record places the boat at a particular location and another places it somewhere else shortly afterward, the distance and expected travel time between those points become important pieces of the sequence. Travel time could reveal another important piece of the timeline. Once the distance between each reported location is established, investigators can estimate how long the boat would normally need to make each trip. Speed limits, water conditions, stops, and the type of vessel could all affect those estimates, so the calculations would need to be based on reliable information. That creates a practical way to test the reported sequence. If documented timestamps show enough time for the boat to travel between two locations, that portion of the timeline becomes easier to understand. If the timing appears unusually tight, investigators could look for missing stops, inaccurate timestamps, or other details that might explain the difference. Boat activity in the surrounding area.
And then that's when they finally go and take the boat out of the water. Now, it seems to me like they were dropping people off, because look how it goes in a little bit, almost like it was pulling into this pier at the marina, like I suspected. And they were just making the rounds, dropping people off before the party. Now, her family and Wyatt's family, Warren's family, they're all connected. They're also part of the yacht club stuff. All of these rich families are super close, super connected. They're taking each other's kids on vacations, etc.
Could provide additional context as well. Marina records, docking information, fuel purchases, navigation data, and documented communications may help establish which vessels were moving through certain locations during specific periods. None of those records alone would necessarily explain what happened, but together they could strengthen or challenge parts of the existing timeline. The next question becomes, which of these records were actually collected and how closely they were compared? A single timestamp can seem insignificant until it is placed beside another record from the same period, especially when the remaining window of uncertainty is already beginning to narrow. Once those records are placed side by side, even small differences could become significant. A call logged at one time, a Jeep's point recorded minutes later, and a marina entry from the same period may help establish a sequence that is much more precise than any single account. But discrepancies need careful examination. A timestamp that appears unusual does not automatically prove that something suspicious happened. Devices can use different clock settings, records can be entered later, and people may remember approximate times rather than exact minutes. Investigators would need to establish how each system records its data before making comparisons. The original files could be especially valuable here. Metadata may show when certain digital records were created, stored, or modified, while official logs can provide another reference point.
Well, just in May, there was a joint birthday party. In the background of this birthday party from the beginning of May, there's Warren's mom, there's his little brother, and right there in the background is the mayor of Ocean Springs, Bobby Cox. In fact, here's another picture of him from the party, just in case that profile view wasn't enough for you. Oh, and he was tagged in the picture. Oh, and remember Lieutenant Carone, the first person on the report that we see when Nolan's mom called him in missing? Well, as it turns out, someone that he's related to, I can't pinpoint exactly how the relation is, but their maiden name is the same as his last name.
When those details match information from separate sources, confidence in that portion of the timeline becomes stronger. The same process can be applied to statements made by the people involved. Instead of judging an account by how it sounds, investigators can compare specific details with independently documented information. Where was the boat supposed to be at that moment? How much time had passed since the previous confirmed event? And which records can place it there? Those questions become increasingly important as the timeline moves toward the period when communication, boat movements, and the reported sequence of events begin to overlap. That overlap puts the communications into sharper focus. Calls and messages could help establish what information was known at specific moments, when concerns were first raised, and how quickly that information moved between the people involved. The order matters more than assumptions about anyone's intentions. Investigators could compare call logs and message timestamps with the boat's reported movements to determine whether certain communications happened before, during, or after particular stops. Even a difference of several minutes could change how one part of the timeline is understood. The content of those communications also needs proper context. A short message or brief phone call can easily be misunderstood when separated from the conversations surrounding it. Whenever possible, complete records would provide a more reliable picture than isolated screenshots, partial quotes, or secondhand descriptions. There is another detail to consider. When did each person actually receive important information? A call can be placed without being answered, a message can arrive without being read immediately, and information can be passed from one person to another later. Those distinctions could explain apparent gaps without automatically suggesting anything unusual. By matching confirmed communications with documented locations and times, investigators may be able to establish exactly when the situation changed and when the people involved began responding to it. Pinpointing when the response began.
Yeah, turns out they have the same last name as who? the girl whose party it was. And I have confirmed that that woman is mutual friends of the mother of the girl who threw the party. And I'm gonna go ahead and just wild guess theory, this is alleged, but I'm gonna go ahead and guess that the reason they waited so long to tell the mom was they were waiting to make sure that he was on shift. And this is why I'm thinking more and more that they brought Nolan back to the house. Everybody got their stories straight and stuff, and then they waited to tell Nolan's mom until he was going to be on his shift and taking that phone call.
Could clarify another major section of the timeline. Once concern was raised, investigators could examine who was contacted first, what information was provided, and which actions followed. Dispatch logs, call records, and official reports may help establish that sequence without relying entirely on anyone's memory. The wording used at each stage could matter as well. What someone knew during an early phone call may have been very different from what became known later. Statements made at different times should therefore be compared with the information that was actually available at those moments, rather than judged using details learned afterward. The response on the water could also be matched against the same timeline. Records showing when assistance was requested, when vessels entered particular areas, and which locations were checked could help explain how events unfolded. Any apparent delays or gaps would need to be examined alongside the information responders had at the time. The boat's reported route, communications, Jeep's information, dispatch activity, and response records can then be placed into one chronological sequence. Some moments may be supported by several independent records, while other portions may rely on fewer sources. Comparing those records minute by minute could show where the documented times match and where the sequence becomes less certain. When all of these records are placed together, the biggest questions are still about what happened to Nolan and whether more could have been done during those critical hours. The legal case surrounding Nolan's passing may bring additional attention to the response timeline, including when authorities were first contacted, what information they received, and why certain decisions were made. There are also questions surrounding the early communications. What exactly were authorities told that led them to believe the situation did not require a different response at that moment? And after Nolan was reported missing to a family member, what communications followed? These details matter because the complete sequence could provide important context for understanding the actions taken that night. A legal case related to someone's passing does not automatically mean another person intentionally caused them harm. One of the central issues can be whether reasonable actions were taken under the circumstances and whether a different response could potentially have changed the outcome. That is why the conduct of everyone involved should be examined through verified records, evidence, and the information available to them at the time, rather than assumptions or online speculation. Ultimately, the goal is to understand what happened to Nolan and how the response unfolded from beginning to end. There are still unanswered questions, but those answers need to come from evidence. What do you think about the timeline and everything we've covered? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please like, subscribe, and share the video so others can follow the story as well. Thanks for watching.